Hey everyone, welcome back to part two of our three-part series with Bob Lotich from seedtime.com. In our first episode, we explored Bob and Linda's personal journey from financial struggle to radical generosity and the stewardship mindset that made that possible for them. Today, we move from the story to the systems behind it, because often the reason people aren't giving more isn't a lack of desire, it's a lack of practical tools, a pathway. In this episode, we're going to talk about the real mechanics behind generosity, how money moves, why giving what's left usually fails, and how churches can shift from simply asking people to give toward equipping them to become generous stewards. Bob, I'm excited to have you back to discuss this important topic of giving and why congregations aren't giving or giving more.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here, Leo. Thank you, and excited to be back and chat some more.
All right. Well, you make a really important distinction that the biggest barriers to generosity is often not a heart problem. And I agree with you, but the mechanics behind it. What makes people able to give? So, what do you mean by that? Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I tend to believe that as Christians that we have the heart of the Father and that we have a desire to be generous. And of course that can be dulled, and life's circumstances I think can make it so that some people have less of a desire. But I think in general, a lot of people actually have a desire to give and understand that there is some joy in it. But I think the reality that we see, that I think we all know, probably most of us listening know, is that there is a big difference between being in a situation. Well, I'll just say it this way. I think managing money in the 21st century has become far more complex than it used to be 50 years ago, just with all the different money moving through subscriptions and different accounts and the credit cards and Venmo and Cash App and PayPal, like all these different things. And add to that all the different subscriptions. And it's can be really complicated to actually know what's going on with their finances. And, versus again, going back 50 years ago, where it's like maybe you had a checking account and most things were bought with cash. And it was just a bit simpler to kind of understand what was going on. And so I think my perception after working with a lot of different students has been that the mechanics piece of this, I think, is a much bigger deal now than maybe it was in the past. And so what that looks like is is really essentially kind of like we were talking about the last session. Whereas, like, if we do want to give, it's more critical now than ever, I believe, to follow in what Paul was talking about in First Corinthians 16:2, where he talks about this idea of setting money aside as soon as you get paid. And one translation says to put it in safekeeping. And I remember talking to my wife Linda about this, and she was saying, that's safekeeping. I don't think that's from thieves. I think it's from us to keep us from spending it. And
That's
so there's
good.
something about the first fruits idea and setting it aside and making that the first thing that goes out and setting up the system to make sure that that happens automatically so that we can protect it from us and our spending.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things that I think you experienced this in your financial freedom class is that as people are going through, you realize that their lack of understanding what the real cost of things are, right? Just
Yeah.
being kind of taught, especially the Gen Z have been taught that it's all about can you afford the monthly payment?
Yeah.
Right? If you have money in the bank and you can afford the monthly payment, you're good. You're enjoying life, you're having experiences, all is good. And it's almost been, I think, intentional to make them not, or make it much more difficult, I should say, to find the true cost of something.
Yep.
And I,
Yeah.
I saw this
Absolutely.
shift years ago. I started blogging a few years back, and one of the things that I noticed, and I wrote an article about this, when the iPhone went over $1,000, and I was kind of in outrage. I'm like, because I was also already an iPhone kind of junkie, and I was like, oh, and I always hold mine way longer than, I don't go like 12, 13, 14, and like I usually go, I have a 12 right now, and we're like on 17. So my 12 is still working fine. So I hold on to mine. So I was one of those. I see the phone, and I go on the website, and the one thing that was very apparent to me, and I guarantee you, 99% of people didn't see what I saw, but it was intentional. It no longer gave the amount which they used to. It would say starting at 9.99 or starting at whatever. It actually had the monthly amount first, and you'd have to scroll down to
Mhm.
find the actual cost. And it made me angry. I was like, this is just not right. Because as soon as you say it's 39 a month for 3 years or whatever, then anybody's like, well, I can afford that. And so I think this has been this intentional shift, especially with younger generations. And all of the digital way that we manage money just makes it so simple for people to be unaware of the true cost and unaware whether they can or cannot really afford something and what they're giving up. I think that's the mechanics I think that are an important part of helping people to understand how to manage their money so that eventually they can be generous.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the mindset comes like, I can't afford to give. Like, I can barely survive. Like, I don't have any extra money. What are you talking about extra money? And it's also I think the argument that I don't have any money. Why do I need to budget? Like, there's so little. Like, both of those arguments make no sense to me because without a plan, you're doomed to fail. Like, you have no idea what you're doing 99% of the time. But it is more, um, it's more focused on the fact that I think a lot of churches are just not educating people in the mechanics. They're not bringing this awareness to them. So that's why I appreciate what you guys do. What we, many of the churches that we serve, is that they take that as a priority. It's like, we're going to help you to give, but we recognize that we can, as a pastor, I can preach a message and get somebody to give, but I don't want to do that and put them in a worse financial situation because I stirred them to give.
Yeah.
I'd rather
Well,
teach them to understand, and then once they have that stability and understand, they can make a logical decision. But I agree with you. They need to take that step and say, I'm going to set it aside. Otherwise, it'll never happen.
yeah. Yeah. No, those mechanics, those systems, and as you were talking about the thing with Apple, I was thinking, you know what? This would be a great idea. You could make so much money if you start selling trucks and just like really expensive cars with 20-year car loans.
Yep. Yep.
And it's like it probably will happen because it just keeps going more and more that direction. But and I'm also reminded of that proverb that says the eyes of man are never satisfied. And I think fundamentally that is a big part of it. And I'm not dismissing the difficulty for Gen Z and younger millennials right now, given the state of the real estate mortgage arena. And there's a lot of like challenges,
Absolutely.
job situations, student loan stuff. Like, I'm not dismissing that, but at the end of the day, I agree with you. I think so much of it is a lack of education and a lack of setting up the systems that really are simple. It's really not hard. It is just a matter of staying committed and removing, this is one of my big things that I love helping people do is removing willpower as much as possible in making one good decision to set up some sort of automated thing that makes hundreds or thousands of good decisions for you automatically afterwards. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to the next question, and you make this statement that giving out of what's left is not a great strategy.
hmm
Why does the giving out of what's left approach almost always fail? And
Yeah.
how would you define that and help people understand what that why that's not something that's going to work as far as becoming generous and being consistent in giving?
Yeah. Yeah, because life happens, and I'd love to. I mean, sure, there's a lot of really good psychology behind all this, but again, back to that human nature thing, and this is all stuff that we all know, but it's just if it's not first, it just doesn't happen, or
Mhm.
it's far less likely to happen. And again, this is the brilliance of the first fruits, of which there's so many, I think, powerful principles and effects and things that are tied up and rolled up in this idea of first fruits. But fundamentally, there's something powerful there that I think we can take from just on a mechanics level, like wisdom from the Bible, not to mention the honor and the trust and everything else that kind of comes out of doing that. But, and just anecdotally, personally, I think a lot of people have walked through that side of, yeah, I'll do that later. And then you just realize later never comes month after month after month after month. And then once you experience the opposite and you actually start operating through a system where the important things are being pulled out first, suddenly you see how stark of a contrast it is to the other way that you were living. And so, again, having spent many years doing it that way, I'm fully, fully convinced personally that I don't ever want to go back to that because there's so much more like and again, so we can talk about this in the context of giving, but it's the same with saving and investing. It's like the fastest way to build a savings account is to automatically save money every month. It's not to wait to the end of the month. Whatever's left over, I'll put in a savings account. You're not going to build it very fast. I
No.
promise, and even
Nope.
if you're
You
say,
will never
because
put what you thought you put into it.
yeah, and then even if you're like, well, I'm going to get a raise next month, and it's like, all right, it's going to be the same way. I promise. Like, it just is the way it works. Expenses rise to meet income, and it's just what happens. So it's just one of those things. It's just sound wisdom. And the sooner you can get on board with it, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the missing component with any financial education that's out there is that it doesn't talk about the importance of that sequencing of how you actually spend your money. And there are some people out there that teach this. I remember reading Rich Dad Poor Dad many years ago, and that's one of the things that Robert Kiyosaki said. And he uses this example where he said that they were going to save first and then live on the rest. And so he's trying to, because obviously the saving was for investing. So he thought, well, I want to have money to invest, so we're just going to put money aside. And he had a bookkeeper. I think he called the Betty the bookkeeper. I think that was her name. I remember the story. I don't know why it sticks with me, but it did. And the whole point was like this woman started tracking their expenses and doing the ledger of it. And she came to him like within a week and said, you can't save first. Like you don't have enough money to pay your bills. And he's like, no, we're going to save first. That's a priority to us. So we're going to do
Yeah.
that. And she's like, well, I can't manage your money if there's no money to left to manage. It's like, said, no, what you need to tell us is how much more money do we need to take care of our responsibilities.
Yeah.
It's like, let us go back and make the money. You just make sure you prioritize in this way. The whole point of the story is that he made a decision, he and his wife made a decision to become investors, to have money to invest. So they prioritize it above their spending. But instead of saying, well, we don't have enough to pay XYZ bill or to buy food or whatever, they use that as a motivation to not tap into the savings because that was untouched in their minds,
Yeah.
but to
Yeah.
say, hey, we need to go out there and make a little bit more money to take care of what's left over.
Yeah.
And so they prioritize. And that's really, I think, the thing that you're saying, the thing we're saying is that when you have a sequencing in your giving, in your saving, in your budgeting, it prioritizes the things that matter the most in the long term. In the moment, my priority might be I want to go out to eat. I don't want to cook. I want to go out to eat. And it's going to cost me $50. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's in the moment, that's my priority. But if I don't have a plan, it's easy to go do that because there's nothing really telling me, is there something more important? No
Yeah.
one's calling me and saying, Leo, have you thought about your kid's college education or your retirement? You sure you want to do this? It's going to cost you X amount in 20 years. Nobody's telling me that. But
Yeah.
a plan allows me to constantly keep myself to what the priorities are. And I think that's the important thing about that we need to teach people is that when you make a decision to give first, when you make a decision to save second, and then build your life on that's left over, it
Yeah.
changes everything. It makes you
Yeah.
aware, it makes you wise.
Well, and I love that Kiyosaki thing because I mean, he's not coming at that from a Christian perspective,
Mm-mm,
and that's just saving. And so, how
mm-mm.
much more if we're giving and we're trusting that God's going to provide for our needs? Like, how much more is that going to work out than in Kiyosaki's case that he's talking about? So, yeah, I think for us as believers, man, it'd be great if we get all the church
Yeah.
just starting to operate that way. Be life
Yeah. I mean,
changing.
it's a kingdom principle. All of these are God's principles that He put in place for our own good. And we ignore them at our own peril, unfortunately. You know, and like you, I'm committed to trying to help as many people overcome those kinds of mistakes and change their behavior and transform to a different way of living, but also young people to avoid them altogether. Like my wife and I were very keen on we're going to teach our kids about that to avoid that, so they don't have to
Yeah.
suffer through the same thing. Now they could still make their own decision, and but we did our best to say, here's what we recommend you do. And to the best of our knowledge, they're following those principles. Not
That's
perfectly,
awesome.
because it's not easy. I wasn't perfect when I was doing it.
Yeah.
One of the things you talk about is John Wesley's formula. And you said that it works best. So first define it for us and explain how this framework helps people think about earning, saving, giving, and living in a more integrated way.
Yeah, it's funny. We when we were writing our book, we were writing a giving book, and I won't go into a long story here, but we were writing a giving book, and we went to the publishers, and the publisher we really wanted to go with is like, well, we like your giving book, but you talk about all these other facets of money. And so I'd love for you to do that. And so they wanted us to talk about all facets of personal finance and we could include giving. And so I went back and just kind of going through my notes and praying. And the Lord directed me to this John Wesley quote that I had used for years. And it was this. It was essentially, John Wesley talked about this a whole lot, but essentially it was earn all you can, save all you can. And by save, he meant like reduce your expenses so that you can give all you can.
Yes.
And that ended up kind of being well, really very much the framework for our book. And we ended up adding like a fourth kind of component to it, which is essentially to enjoy it all. Because I believe that there are, and I'll speak for myself. I spent many years hating the work that I was doing and instead of being thankful and grateful for it, instead of working, unto the Lord, instead of whatever, what I should have been doing. And so God gave me an opportunity to make money and I wasn't enjoying it. At the same time, there were many years where it's like I did not want to save any money. I did not want to reduce my expenses. I just wanted to spend everything that came in. And I've learned to enjoy that. And even my wife, the spender of our family, actually has learned to enjoy that a little bit. And then the same thing with giving. It's like I did not grow up with a heart of generosity. And by God's grace, He's done some work in my heart and gotten me to the point where I'm like, giving is one of the most fun things that I get to do in life.
Mm.
And so that's what I truly believe is that all three of these key components of things that we do with money as believers, we have the opportunity to enjoy each of the moments within them. And so anyway, so that's ended up being a framework that we've lived by for many, many years and talked about a whole lot at this point now.
Yeah. I so appreciate you brought that up because I think it's so easy for people who haven't had this experience, haven't lived this way and have wrestled with it, so to speak, and understand the faithfulness of the provision of God. But also, like you said, it's like they get the chance to give and they realize that the incredible benefit and joy that you get from giving money away rather than
Mhm.
thinking, I just don't have enough yet. And so it flips the script for you. But people who haven't walked down that path, I think it's so easy for them to feel that, yeah, it's easy for you to say, or to even adapt a mindset that, oh, this whole thing is about saving and living on very little so you can give it all away. That just doesn't, okay, great. That's what God put us on this earth for, is just to sacrifice and live a miserable life. But yet, Ecclesiastes, Solomon, after all his years of wisdom and imparting it to so many, he writes Ecclesiastes. And one of the biggest themes of Ecclesiastes is to enjoy life, enjoy the
Yeah.
work God's given you. It's like
Yeah.
through that, you're actually, it's the greatest gift to God that we enjoyed the gift He's given us. Think about this. I read a book recently that brought this very clear for me. The idea of, and there's a story said in there that if the author bought a Buzz Lightyear back in when it was, whatever, that was in the 90s or whatever, when it was like real popular when it came out. And it's, if I bought this Buzz Lightyear and I gave it to my son and he takes it and he keeps it in the box and he looks at it from time to time and he's like, it's nice, but never plays with it, just sits on the shelf. He says, so that's one scenario. The other scenario, he takes it and within a couple of years, it's all scuffed up. It's been through crazy adventures. It's had so much fun. And you look at it and it's all like, you can tell, like, this is a well used toy. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes we look at life that way. It's either we're going to spend everything and not care, which is not doing God's way, it's doing our way. Or we think of life as, oh, it's meant to be suffered so that we can get to heaven in some day. And the
Yeah.
only way to achieve that is to give it all away. And that's not what we're saying. I think that's one of the dangers of becoming a good steward is that you can become so system driven that you forget, like, God doesn't need you to sacrifice. God doesn't need you
Yeah.
to live substandard. In fact, He gives us all things to enjoy.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a balance. And I think that's why following God's plan is not taking any of these principles and making them or living them in a way that's unhealthy, but actually bringing them into alignment to say, this is what God says. And you do it with Him because He's the one that's going to guide and direct us. And sometimes we'll go, we'll get ahead of our skis a little bit. And sometimes, we'll fall back and He's like, no, no, go and enjoy it. There's been many times Because I learned this early on. I was like, save everything, give everything. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, am I getting my identity from giving? Am I trying to like win God's favor? Like what is my motivation here? And I realized,
Yeah.
and there had to be other people in my life that basically pointed and said, what is your motivation here? Like, I mean, take care of yourself, take care of your family, have a nice vacation. God's not against it. And I think we got to be careful with that as well, because it could
Yeah.
easily take the wrong perspective.
No, I think that's so good. And what I'm coming to realize and understand about money and the wisdom with which God tests us with money is that all of us, there are tests that all of us have, that it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of whatever man's kind of view of good stewardship, whether it's like you're perfect or you're just a high performance spender and every single thing that comes in gets spent. Like God has a test for each one of us. And it doesn't matter how many mile markers we get through, like there's still things where he can test us. Cause even if we do something really, really well for a while, we might start leaning just a little bit too far in the other direction. And he's like, all right, well, I'm going to pull you back this way, just like you're talking about. And so, and I think that's what's so interesting about it. And one of the things that I love communicating to people, I remember when we were writing our book, I was asking, kind of surveying a lot of people in our audience and asking them, what are the things you hate most about money books? And the number one thing that people said was, I hate that so many of them seem to be one size fits all. And I'm like, that's it.
Hmm.
I completely agree because God has created each one of us with a unique calling, with a unique purpose. And of course, our financial lives are going to look different because of
Yep.
that. So he
Yeah.
might call us to do different things financially. And so we had a season where God called, like I said, to give us a really high percentage of our income, but that's not for everybody. Like that's
Mm.
kind of what he's called us to do, and it's seasonal,
Yeah.
and so that
Exactly.
season may not last forever. And so, like what you're talking about, the identity thing, like we've literally had that because part of our platform, was built around our giving and, us giving our age as a percentage of our income for a while. And so, like, we became known as that by a lot of people, and then when God led us to, like, make a change, um, it's like, "Well, God, we're kind of on this thing, like, we got a thing going here," and he's like, "Well, are you gonna obey me, or are you gonna keep sticking with your thing?" And, so anyway, so my point is, like, I completely agree, like, there has to be a fluidity and we actually wrote a chapter in our book talking about enjoying spending,
Mhm.
just for that reason, because I've been around enough people who can get too legalistic in things to where they actually feel like, no, I can't spend anything on myself. And I think God's like, hey, I love you. I want you to go out on that vacation. Like,
Yeah.
I want you to do X, go buy donuts with your 5 year old. Like, because that's what I want for my kids, right? Like, if I bought them these presents and they're like, no, I'm just not going to play with it, like, because whatever, I don't feel like I should, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's definitely an unhealthy. We take an unhealthy perspective because we misinterpret. Or again, I think it always goes back to identity. I was broken when financially, emotionally, I was going through depression because of where I found myself. It started or genesis from the fact of how I saw myself. The fact that I lost my job, that was an identity crisis to me. But it also tied to money, where I was living, how much money I made. Because again, that's what we do. Naturally, we do this. The problem with is that once you adapt this mindset of, okay, I'm going to do it God's way, then you can easily say, I'm going to follow all the rules. And then I'm going to have, you know, God's going to love me. I'm going to be successful. Again, it's always about us. Like, we're the center of the universe. We always try to become the center. And I think stewardship can lead you from being, you can go from being a huge money spender, not having any plan, to I've got every single penny outlined for the next 30 years. God, don't mess with my plan. It's like, well, you're probably in the same boat. You're not trusting God either way.
yeah,
You're doing it because of you. And I think
exactly.
that's what I love about this topic of money and possessions and wealth, because it's so tied to how we interpret who we are, our identity at any given point. And when that identity is challenged, it's God's way of saying, hey, you're drifting off of who I made you to be. And this is what's bringing it to the surface. It's how much you
Yeah.
work, how much money you're putting aside, how much money you're giving or not giving. And
Mhm.
and that's why we so many times I found that a lot of us in the stewardship realm, we're such frugal people, right? We're trying to teach people how to do it that sometimes we lean on the we're going to save more and not spend and sometimes give sacrificially at the expense of our own families. I've seen that happen. And that's anyway, it's a shame because God wants the balance in our lives. And when we stay connected with him, we can have that. Um, as we kind of wrap up this episode, Bob, I want us to kind of bring it back to the reality that many people in our churches aren't giving. We sometimes look at that and say, well, they're not giving because, and we can fill in the blank. But let's talk about the real reason why they're not giving. And we touched on some of it. The fact that it's not because they don't have a desire to give, it's because they lack the mechanics, the systems. So, what are some of the practical tools and systems that pastors can use as they're teaching, as they're equipping people on how to become more generous? But ultimately, we talked about this in the last episode. Let's help them become good stewards that will lead to generous lifestyle because they'll have margin, they'll be able to give, they won't be blocked by that ability. But how do we help them? Give them some practical tools on how to do
Yeah, so I love talking about this stuff.
that.
And so, yeah, so a handful of things we've talked about in the last or this episode and the previous one, but I'll just highlight a few. So, the seed account, I think, is a huge way. So essentially, having people set up a dedicated account for giving that is funded before anything else. Like, I think that's just such a powerful, practical thing. The 1% challenge that we talked about, essentially, it's the easiest on ramp to start increasing and growing in generosity. And it just gets momentum going. It's painless. It's just basically pretty easy. So those are two different things. Another thing I would add is automating giving as much as possible. So like I always did love dropping cash into the bucket, but even though I really did love that, and I'm not, I'm not a stickler for this. It's like if someone really wants to do that, that's fine. But the reality is that when I did that, I was not nearly as consistent of a giver as when I set up automated giving. So at the beginning of the month, when payday comes, I automatically give my 10% to my church. And then we have other charities and organizations we support. It all happens automatically. And believe it or not, as soon as we did that, now we're perfectly consistent givers. Whereas before, it was all dependent on whether or not I remembered, whether or not we had a big expense that month, or like all these other things. So the automating is a really, really big thing. And like another thing I would add here too. I mean, since we are talking to the Christian stewardship people, financial education, like
Mm,
like
yeah,
the
for sure.
idea of being able to help people actually improve their finances so they have more money to give, like is just going to be very, very helpful, right?
Yes.
And so I really love that part of it. And then the other piece I would add, I'm sorry, I'm getting lots of ideas here.
That's okay.
But the other thing I think is worth highlighting too is just showing people what it looks like. This is a big thing that we really try to do at Seed Time is inspire people to generosity. There are plenty of if you need help, using guilt and shame to get people giving, like there's a lot of ways to do that.
Amazing.
It's very, very common and it's just not our MO. And I have found that it seems to be far more effective when you help paint a picture and inspire people to generosity and what it looks like and what this world of generosity that God has available to all of us looks like and not what people believe it looks like because it's very, very different than what people think because people think I'm going to give money and whatever X y or Z, but the reality is it's very, very different. And so to be able to paint that picture for them and paint a picture of what it looks like and the joy that comes and all of this stuff, we found that to be a far more effective vehicle for actually developing a culture of generosity. And you can like you were saying, you can preach a sermon and lay on the guilt and shame and your giving will go up for a little bit. But man, if you want to create a culture where it lasts, inspiring people um, is the way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, that's the challenge with and for leaders, church leaders, especially the ones that get to preach every weekend or give the giving moment or both. is that they can take the shortcut. And sometimes they're tempted to do so, and sometimes they do
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but it's not a great long-term strategy. And I think the worst thing about it is that it can have a negative effect that can not last actually years of people opposing giving to the church because it makes it very transactional, right? The church is in trouble, the church needs my money, but the church has no idea what I'm going through. They're not providing any assistance for me, and I think this is where we need to do both, not just inspire people to give through real testimonies, real life examples of people who are being generous, not because they have to, because they have caught on and understand it and have lived it. So they can be a great model for people and share that story in a way that's meaningful and it's not manipulative. So I love stories for that purpose. But I also think if you really are going to ask people to be part of a healthy church and contribute in every way, not just financially, but in every way to the church, you need to be your primary responsibility as the church leader is to equip them to live out the victorious Christian life. How do you do that without teaching them on money, the thing that they wrestle with every single day?
No, it's so
Should it be a
good.
priority? I think it should be a priority. Is it the only thing you talk about? God, no. But it should be something that's very intentionally being shared. As much as you're preaching on giving, you should be preaching on stewardship. So that you have a balance of saying, here's what we want for you. We want you to understand how to manage. We're going to give you biblical principles that will help you. Because that's, you and I live those and have seen the fruit of that. So if it
Yeah.
worked for us, it'll work for them. And pastors and leaders just need to be intentional about doing that. And then challenge them to give so they don't become greedy. So they don't become about building their net worth, but they're actually, storing treasure in heaven, which is what we all
Yeah.
want to do.
Well, and I think that's really good. We were speaking, my wife and I were speaking at a church, I guess a few weeks ago, and that was one of the things that they were saying that I'm like, oh, this is so good. So they didn't just bring us in to browbeat their people into giving, but they
Yeah,
actually
totally
came
doing
to
that.
us and said, hey, we want you to come bring something for our people. We're not trying to get anything out of them. We want you to help them financially move
Yes.
forward.
Awesome.
Um, and I just appreciate that posture because within that, I because again, like for the church leader, like, I'm not a pastor, but like I understand it all comes back down to trusting God. Like at the end of the day, like the congregation is not your source. Like
Mhm.
God is your financial source.
That's right.
And
Thank you.
in it, like anybody else, it's easy to lose sight of that and to
Mhm.
look to the wrong thing. But anyway, back to what you're saying. I think that is the best long term approach, and to think about it that way, I think just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's great. Well, why don't you share real quick how people can learn more about what you guys do at Seed Time and how they can connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. So our website is seedtime.com. And basically, what we offer is a 6 week financial program for churches and small groups. And we have a book called Simple Money Rich Life. Some churches will use that as a small group study. And yeah, you can find us on the website, any of our other resources as well.
Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you again for coming on, talking about this more practical. I think this episode was more about the practical side of how to actually lead people to be generous and incorporating stewardship into that. So I appreciate your perspective, your experience, everything you brought to this episode. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Leo.
My pleasure. And if you want to learn more about Bob, his resources at seedtime.com are outstanding, and we'll include those links in the show notes. And if you're a pastor or stewardship leader who wants support in building these pathways inside your church, I'd love to invite you to explore CSN membership at christianstewardshipnetwork.com, where you'll find resources, training, and a network of leaders doing this work every single day. Join us in the final episode as we talk about how to build a lasting culture of generosity in your church. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Stewardship Leader.